Welcome and thank you for joining us for our Reconciliation Week for Ryala Institute seminar about working together to understand the impacts of cultural burning. For people on the line, we do still have some people coming into the room here at ARI, so it's a great opportunity to have a shared seminar of both people here at Heidelberg versus a few hundred people online. So you might hear a little bit of noise as people are coming in the room, so just that in advance. My name is James Todd. I'm the Acting Chief Biodiversity Officer and Director of Arthur Ryala Institute at DECA, and I'll be chairing today's seminar. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners on the land which we're meeting here at Heidelberg, the Wadawurrung people, and pay my respects to elders past and present. I'd also like to extend my respects and acknowledgement to any traditional owners or Aboriginal people who might be with us today, and obviously to those traditional owners on the land which people may be dialing in from across Australia. I think it's really important that we acknowledge that yesterday was Sorry Day and today is National Reconciliation Week. This year's theme is Now More Than Ever. This theme highlights the urgency and importance of our collective efforts towards reconciliation. Now more than ever, it's time to learn about our shared histories and cultures and explore how each of us can contribute to achieving reconciliation in Australia. Now more than ever, the work continues in treaty making, truth telling, and recognising the rights of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders. Early on in this week, it is essential that Indigenous voices are central to all conversations and actions. We must listen and act in ways that support Indigenous self-determination and sovereignty. During Reconciliation Week and beyond, we commit to fostering meaningful partnerships and taking concrete actions that uphold the rights and dignity of First Peoples across Australia. This includes advocating for policies and practices that reflect their needs and aspirations, ensuring that a future built on mutual respect and understanding. So today's seminar is going to be an example of that, where we'll hear from Blair Gilson behind me here from Wadawurrung Corporation and ARI's Dr Brad Farmilo, who will be discussing the cultural significance and monitoring and collaboration of the Wiyn Murrup cultural burning program on Wadawurrung Country. I have time for questions at the end. For those online, if you can write those into the chat, we'll see if we can distill those into the most popular questions, and obviously we've got people in the room here as well. So we'll try and manage between the two audiences. So please make Blair and Brad feel welcome with a round of applause, and over to you guys.
Yeah, g'day everyone. Welcome to the ARI presentation. My name's Blair Gilson. I'm a Wadawurrung man. I've been with Corporation for about 15 years. First started with in cultural heritage and made our way over to cultural burning. So today we've got the working together to understand the importance of burning. I am one of the cultural burn officers at Wadawurrung, the Wiyn Murrup. So as you can see on the screen, I'm going to be talking mostly about Wadawurrung Country, as that's my mob and that's where I'm from. You can see the study area, how it's kind of central to our country and where we are in comparison. I'd like to acknowledge all the other mobs as well.
So I'd like to do a bit of acknowledgement at the start of a presentation and acknowledge where this work has come from. Essentially, it's federal money that's come through by Karangamite CMA for their project protecting the Victorian volcanic plains. And the CMA engaged both Wadawurrung Traditional Owners Corporation and the Arthur Ryala Institute to help deliver this work. And also noting that the project was supported by a number of other agencies, either via volunteering and assisting with the data collection or supporting the application of burns on the particular study sites.
Also, just on that, I'd like to acknowledge some of our partners that we work with, Eco, Melbourne Water, some neighbours, you guys as well. So yeah, thank you for all that. Part of the history with the cultural burns in Wadawurrung. So we started, my auntie Tony started this in about 2014. Doing one of their first cultural burns, Wadawurrung Country, actually in one of these areas that was a study area as well. Then guys did that alongside CFA, and part of the learnings was CFA were doing a burn on one side and we were doing a burn on the other. CFAs went for about 3 minutes and they went home and then came back for the following week. We did ours over about 8 hours and we got to go home at the same way. Just so, yeah, from then we've been evolving. So now we've got a team of about 10 which come out with us. All our mob come out as well and do burnings with us. So what is Wiyn Murrup? Wiyn Murrup is fire spirit in like. So we've got our old stories from why we have that naming of the Wiyn Murrup. So as I said, fire spirit, and we try and carry that spirit through the country as we burn. What's important? There's a lot that's important for us burning. It's part of our identity. It's who we are. We love it. We live it, and it's not just us that does it. We've got little juniors that come out to do it, to our elders, and that can be old people in their 90s. They're all around the country doing it with us. So, Wiyn Murrup's different to other type of burning. So you might hear lots of like eco burns, that stuff like that. We don't like to be classed as like an ecological burn. We have similar values, but our values are ongoing. So we don't look at something for 3 years. We look for 10 to 100 years, and we keep that cycle going on that land. We look right into the plants, what's going on with them, how can we make sure that they're okay, down to the people, our foods, animals, everything. But what it is, it's not just burning, it's actually looking after that whole ecosystem, which we like to do. Wadawurrung's role in the Wiyn Murrup. So I've touched on a bit, but it's not just Wadawurrung, it's the community. So we have always got community out on what's called sites to be on country burning. They can range. We had a goat on site once. Yeah, so the guys, my son, he's 5 years old and he's actually conducted burns himself. A little story is last year, he was 4 at the time. He said, "Dad, let's burn here." So we did a little burn, and that went for 2 days. And the result of that was we found a massive artefact scatter, which is now registered and protected in the Aboriginal Heritage Act. So that's just him walking on country and saying, yeah, that should be burnt. Obviously he's been guided and helped, but yeah, it's really important that we also listen to our juniors as much as our elders. So as you can see, we've got the 3 sites here, Bakers Lane, Wadawurrung and the Uyanks. So I'll start with Bakers Lane. That's the one that I was just talking about where we started in 2014 and we've now been burning progressively. That's with the local council, Golden Plains Shire, I think it is. And thank Dale Smithland for big support in that role. From burning back then to now, that site's actually been named in one of our naming groups. I'm not too sure how much I can talk about it, but that's going through a process of being renamed back in language. We look at coming back to this site regularly, whether it's yearly or biannual or whatever we can find. And we're looking after multiple things, so trees, plants, animals. I'll touch on a little bit later on as well. Wadawurrung. So Wadawurrung is kind of like we were just driving and I kind of looked out the side of the ute and said, I reckon over there. And we all jumped out and had a good look, and since then we've kind of discovered this amazing site along the river, overlooking lots of kind of like gorges and like rocky outcrops and all that. From discovering that, we then found caves and more kind one of the things that connect us to that part of the country. So burning it has been amazing because now that's the burn that comes into our elders and juniors. So this year, hopefully fairly soon, they'll be going out and burning themselves. There won't be any kind of DECA or CFA or anyone's resources. That's all getting back on country. So yeah, which is really important. Them guys are going to love that. Uyangs is such a significant place for us. It's kind of like our centre. We've got lots of old stories about Uyangs and about the Plains area. So to have the kind of ability to burn a place that we find so significant is really important to our life. Our elders were out at them burns and they just loved country. They loved how they could see the country reacting from the fires. Then cool fires as well. So we're not burning hot and we're not burning to kind of kill everything. They were really observant. I think they're in the videos that we made, but you can see the animals and the bugs crawling up the trees. And that's something that you just probably won't see in other places. As soon as the fire's done, you see them come back down and they go back to what they're doing. So the elders were really observant of that. The feedback that they give us as well is we go back out and we look after that country again. So they say, oh, maybe we need to pick up some wood and all that to let the fire walk through. No worries, that's what we've been doing. So it's a bit of a busy map. You can see where you've got the reserves on that map and all the volcanic plains areas. So we do have to look after volcanic plains. That's a big part of our country. And that can be difficult at times just for access to the country. So yeah, we do get there, but it is also a mission.
So thank you, Blair, for that beautiful introduction, really capturing how important this country is for Wadawurrung people and some of the history there. It's really important to know these kinds of things so that we can act better in partnership and in partnership working better for country, healing country together. I wanted to touch briefly on the partnerships, and Blair, feel free to jump in at any moment, but getting an appreciation as to why this stuff's important. These are things that I've been learning and I've learned through this project, and I'll continue to learn as I work in this space. But it's really important to appreciate two ways of knowing. This is understanding a place through a Western or non-Aboriginal lens, how I was taught to see country, but also getting an appreciation for how First Nations people see country, how they're connected to country, what they feel and what they see when they see a place. And it's going to be different. There's going to be overlap, but there's also going to be aspects that are different. And so getting a better appreciation for that is really important. And for myself, as a non-Aboriginal scientist, as a Western scientist, to see that, but also feel that, like if you can get really incorporated into that process of being there at a place where actions are taking place, that's a really powerful thing. And I'll share a little story about my first experience at a Wiyn Murrup burn at one of those sites that Blair mentioned there. I made some notes, and so I'd like to read it verbatim because it probably captures the way I was feeling a little bit better. The day began with a buzz of excitement and a welcome to country and a smoking ceremony by Wadawurrung. Dr Gilson shared Wadawurrung stories about fire, setting the stage for what was to come. When the fire started, and when it was appropriate for non-Aboriginal people like myself to enter the burn area, I felt an amazing sense of calm and safety. The white smoke didn't challenge my breath, and the fire slowly trickled through the woodland understory. There was no fear, no concern, just a profound respect for the process. And I was deeply moved by that experience, and I felt honoured to be invited. It gave me a greater appreciation for the role of cultural fire in these ecosystems, not just as an action, but as a cultural practice. And seeing it firsthand allowed me to better understand its ecological and cultural significance. The care taken to protect certain values like large trees and the controlled rate of spread that allowed invertebrates to escape the flames, as Blair mentioned, highlighted the thoughtful and deliberate nature of this practice. And I could feel country being healed in that moment. That was a place where it isn't pristine, there's lots of values there, but there's also lots of weeds. Doesn't represent what was there prior to European settlement. But even in that place that was to some eyes degraded, I really felt those things on that day. And so to continue with the partnerships angle, projects like this one we're describing kind of promote inclusivity and respect, and they help progress the ideas of Aboriginal self-determination and their rights as custodians of the land. And it also teaches people like myself how to utilise trust and respect, and in particular active listening. That was a really important thing that I learned through this project, is to listen, allow the space for people to think. When working with partners, that was really important. Did you have anything you wanted to reflect on, Blair, in terms of partnerships?
Yeah, thanks for that lovely story, Brad. One of the things that is really kind of, no one really talks about on the burns, but it's really present, is the amount of love going back into that site. That country has always been looked after, and for a long time it's been taken away of not having any fires. So when we go back out and we put the fire back in, it's showing it that love, like how we have to love each other. And yeah, that kind of really just resonated with me.
So now I'd like to talk a bit about the monitoring program. This was the component that really I kind of became incorporated into the project for. The aim of the monitoring was to gain a better understanding of the role of Wiyn Murrup for improving woodland condition, cultural values. So as Blair mentioned, these are grassy eucalypt woodlands. They occur in the Victorian volcanic plain, and they're extremely threatened. Very little remains of what it would have existed prior to the European invasion. We wanted to do this, but it's also a really challenging thing to do. From a non-Aboriginal Western perspective, we've got ways of kind of quantifying woodland condition. We can measure A, B and C. We can put that together and we can get an idea about whether that's good or poor condition. We wanted to do that. We also wanted to incorporate things like the really important cultural values, cultural use plants, and other aspects of the woodlands that were really important to the Wadawurrung partners. And this is quite complex for those reasons, but also because collecting the information that we need to populate that idea of condition takes a lot of expertise, a lot of botanical understanding that I might have or I hope to have. But not everyone who was going to be involved in the project would have that. So we wanted to make a program that spoke to people's values, collected relevant information, but was also largely able to be collected by the partners. These are NRM managers, these are Wadawurrung traditional owners. And I think we found a way of balancing those two needs. So with the partners, we designed an approach that captured condition using rapid methods. And we also used methods that would enable people to identify values that were outside of that Western or non-Aboriginal viewpoint of a grassland that was important to Wadawurrung. So my role, or ARI's role in this project, was about facilitating the design of that program, like I just described, providing some guidance. So that might be about, well, if you're interested in value A, then this might be a good way of collecting information to see how that changes through time. Meeting on country was a really important component of this project. It allowed us to kind of set things up early, be on the same page. What do we care about? What do we want to measure? Track things through time. How are we progressing? Are things going the direction that we'd hoped? Or are we missing anything? It gave us an opportunity to make sure that we were consistent so that everyone who came through and was providing input into the monitoring data collection was being as consistent as possible. And we also collaborated on the project output. So there's a couple of thumbnails of the reports that were produced as part of this project. One's setting it up and one's evaluating it after 3 years. But both these reports are co-authored by ARI and Wadawurrung. And these will be available via a link, I suspect, in the chat. So the monitoring program, we had the 3 sites that Blair mentioned. At each one of those, we had areas that were earmarked to receive Wiyn Murrup over the next few years, and an area that would be left as a control for in the near future. We wanted to compare how those 2 places changed after the Wiyn Murrup was applied. In each of those areas, we had a central transect that acted a bit like a backbone for a number of larger and smaller quadrats where we would collect various information. The measures were things like trees, the number, the cover, the health, and whether they're recruiting shrubs. Native shrubs are an important component in these systems, so getting an idea of their abundance and recruitment was important. Capturing some information about the understory, diversity and cover was also a really important thing. We wanted to understand how the weedy component was changing. And so at one particular site, the Yuyang's woody weeds were a concern there. So we wanted to make sure we were tracking that. An important aspect as well was that we had the freedom for Wadawurrung to inform any values that they saw as important at each site. So these might be cultural use plants, or they could be, recruitments from eucalypts, things like that. Anything that was important to them could also be incorporated into the monitoring design. So it was flexible in that way. In addition, we collected things like the amount of logs as a bit of a surrogate for fauna habitat, and some ground cover measurements like bare ground litter and soil crust. We also wanted to know about the biomass, because fire is a really great way of controlling biomass. You can see on that image on the left there, that's a site that hasn't had fire in a few years, and you can see the quick accumulation of the grass material there. So that's something that fire, in particular in Murrup, is looking to sort of reverse or clean up. Yeah, go ahead.
And like with the monitoring program, we're really grateful in the sense that we don't understand these kind of things yet. So there's lots of non-native plants that we just don't know. And our old people, they got to look after the country, but they didn't have all these kind of different plants coming in, and they knew what was burning and knew what was happening. But we're kind of in this new learning where we've got to learn lots about non-native plants that we just don't know about. So these monitoring programs can really help us like understand that. And individual sites and individual plants are something that we can now target a bit better and how to work with.
Yeah, it's a good point. It speaks again to exchange, sharing of knowledge, which, we hope that we're getting in equal amounts both ways. So all of those measures were really important to all the partners. Some were more emphasised by others, but all were really deemed quite important to track and to see how things changed. So if we look at a few of those things, so of all the things that we measured, we might not anticipate all of them to change in the first 3 years of a program like this. And the important thing to note here is that this is long-term monitoring. This was set up for monitoring in the long term. So here we've got a few of the measures that were expected might change in the first 3 years of the program, and some of their predicted changes. So we might imagine that recruitment of native trees and shrubs increases after the burn. This might avail space for recruitment, or it might cue germination of soil stored seeds. We might expect the understory cover and diversity of native species to increase, perhaps as a result of fire sort of opening up the space for those things. We'd certainly hope that the species that were deemed desirable or positive species for Wadawurrung would increase, and that those undesirable species, often weeds, would decrease. And in relation to the bare ground, we would assume that one of the more immediate effects would happen in this space, and this is where we might get more bare ground being exposed as a result of the fire, consuming some of the plant material that you saw in one of those images prior. We might expect the amount of leaf litter to decrease, and potentially the soil crust to increase as those areas of bare ground become more available. The soil crust might expand into those areas. And importantly, as we mentioned before, the biomass, that's a really key thing that we want to make sure is being sort of managed in these sites, because biomass gets too big, it excludes everything else, and we end up with a fairly degraded system. And that's degraded both in terms of Western values, wildflowers and those kinds of things, but also in terms of cultural use plants. Jump in.
So some of the results. So we aren't going to get great results in a short amount of time. I will talk to that in a minute. One of the things is we also don't know what might come back from a cultural burn. So a really good example is Yuyang's, one of the sites that this is actually conducted on. We burnt that for the very first time, and that was leaf litter, and amazing burn, went really well. Fortunately, veld grass came back. So how do we now manage veld grass? And we have to change our burning regime up. We don't know what that new seed bank is holding, so we have to kind of be adaptive to the country as it's telling us. So yeah, some of these really great, but yeah, sometimes we might not have the greatest outcome.
That's a really good point, and it speaks to something that a phrase that happens a lot around places like institutes like ARI. It's adaptive management, right? We don't know all the answers, but it shouldn't stop us from trying things, right, and learning as we're doing. So this is probably a good example of that. There's an ongoing commitment to manage these places using cultural practices led by Wadawurrung, but the answers are not yet known. But we're hoping that through time and through monitoring and understanding country, both just reading it in person, but also using data to help back it up, that we start to understand and learn how these things change and hopefully improve. What we did see was, in terms of the data, was we saw an increase in bare ground and a decrease in grassy biomass, which is kind of intuitive. You would expect those kinds of changes in response to a fire. And these are just some plots that kind of show that in a sort of a graphical sense. So this is essentially in the top figure, we've got bare ground, and in the sites affected by Wiyn Murrup in teal, they're increasing relative to the controls. So that's a good outcome, and it means that we might now have space for things to occupy that new. In terms of grassy biomass, we see sort of the inverse. We see a decrease a year after Wiyn Murrup, and so the amount of grass biomass has been decreased relative to those control sites, and that's another really great outcome. And in case numbers aren't your thing, here's just a graphical representation of that. This is the same site, both before and after burning, and you can sort of see those changes kind of manifesting themselves in those images there. So you can see on the left, that's the same image we had earlier, quite rank biomass and a lot of sort of thickets. This stuff acts like mulch, it just suppresses everything else around it. But on the right, post-burn, we get a more open, sort of a grassy understory. And with that, it comes opportunities. Like Blair said, it could be an opportunity for weeds. It might require us to rethink, but it could be an opportunity for native species as well. So what does it all mean? Well, like we've kind of alluded to already, some of these things might take more time to reveal themselves, to show something that's detectable with our methods. But that's the importance of kind of committing to long-term monitoring. And really importantly, this is work that is continuing. So we will be continuing to monitor these sites, and Wadawurrung will continue to burn these sites going forward. So that 3-year funding cycle that we're sort of reporting on here has generated enough evidence to support future funding, which is fantastic.
Also, another big part of what does it mean is Bob gets to go back out in country. Really important. Most of the mob might not get that opportunity in their day-to-day life. Unfortunately, I get to go see a lot of country, so we come up to do these burns and the monitoring and all that kind of stuff. It's given the mob abilities to just come and see different things that they've never seen before. I guarantee every time they come out, they learn something different. I remember that.
So we hope that in time, with some of these real strong benefits of healing country, restoring the vegetation condition, will start to reveal themselves, and this will, there's lots of things that we'd like to see change, but I suppose some of the main things are around the wildflowers. These often intersect with cultural use plants. We want to see healthy trees. These are the components in these systems that are so hard to replace. You remove these trees, you've got to wait 200 years for the next ones to come along. So we've got to be really careful about looking after them, making sure they're in good health, and also fewer weeds. And that kind of speaks to the conundrum that we're often faced, or land managers often face, is like, we do one thing and we don't get the result we want. We have to try something new.
Part by some actions led by Wadawurrung, that does happen, which is really great to see now. So we're getting out there and actually spraying some of these weeds. And we've got natural resource management crews that go out and look after the bushland and I think and the coastline at the moment. So we've got lots of different kind of diversities that we're working.
Yeah, and it's important that projects like this, that Wadawurrung is leading in that space, like that, folks like me are happy to support wherever needed, but the decision to what to do it where and when is really should be led by Wadawurrung where possible. And so when it came to thinking about, like, what are we going to put in this report? at the end, right? Like we've got a few results that are backed up by data that suggest that, you know, the Wiyn Murrup has led to some changes in the ground cover and the biomass has changed. They're good outcomes and they could manifest into really wonderful outcomes in the future, but in and of themselves, it doesn't really make for a hugely compelling story. So we wanted to harness a lot of the conversations that we were having throughout the program to add a bit more weight to the report and also to allow people to sort of learn from what we were doing out there during this project. So, you know, we met a lot on country for various reasons. I've kind of mentioned those already, whether that was about what sites should be selected. I wasn't involved in that Wadawurrung business usually, but burn planning, again, not my business, but monitoring methods, yes, I'd come in and I'd you know, provide insights where needed. But yeah, when it came to the program outputs, it became a tricky one. How are we going to do it? And we were really fortunate by the end of that program, we developed really strong relationships. We were in a place where there was respect, that people felt safe to share. And so because we had developed those relationships, it meant that we were having conversations that were really important, and those conversations were really important for other people to hear too, we felt. And so we tried to capture that in our output report as well. A lot of the time it was benefits. A lot of the things, it's like Blair was mentioning about, you know, like connection to country or time on country or elders and young ones, all these kind of things, wonderful outcomes from the program. But there's also going to be challenges, you know, like this is not always going to run exactly smoothly. And so we wanted to be frank about those challenges so that others could learn from them as well. And there's a good amount of literature that kind of speaks to these things. You know, it's not hidden, but you know, the more we speak about these things, the better we're likely to get progress in this space.
And another big thing for the outcomes is with burn country the way we want, and that's no drip torches, no chemicals. We burn traditionally. That picture there is actually one of the fire sticks that we make up on country as we're going. A bit of grass and it's woven up and tied off, and we use that to carry the fire from one spot to another. It's teaching our mob a lot more kind of traditional practices that they just don't get, and yeah, there's lots of
yeah. So yeah, we're really proud of the report, and like I said, there'll be a version of that online for those that are interested. So, to the future, what happens next? Well, we've learned a great deal. We know something now that we probably already knew, which was that this is a really important practice for these systems for a number of reasons, both for, you know, healing country, healing people, really important stuff to support. The idea of partnerships is also a really important one, and one that I think the project did a really good job of sort of harnessing. You know, it was facilitated, like Karangamite CMA have been wonderful in sort of facilitating that, but then everybody comes together with an open mind and, you know, sort of respect being displayed. It meant that, you know, that partnership was really strong and led to some really wonderful outcomes. And I suppose something from me to an audience that might be interested in this space, but hasn't yet kind of embarked on it yet. If you've got interest in this sort of stuff, then having discussions, engaging with conversations with your colleagues, to get a better idea about, you know, how you can contribute is going to be really, really important moving forward. So I'd suggest everyone engage in those conversations, not just this week, but all the time. Do you have anything you want to add there, Blair?
No, we're eventually, hopefully soon, going to have a fire strategy as well, which can help answer some of your questions. It has stuff in there that the mob have worked on all together. Dr Gilson's been leading it, and yeah.
I think that's all from us. Thanks, James.
Thanks, Blair and Brad. That was fantastic. I reckon this is a great example of a project of applying two ways of knowing. People in the audience might not be aware of this, but Beaker and Park Victoria do have a two ways of knowing policy. This is really recognising that we have a sound basis in Western science, but We've also got lots to learn from traditional owners about managing the country, and the secret to hopefully a healthy country in the future and good management of that country is bringing the two worlds together. And I think this is a great example of learning from each other. And Brad, you mentioned the adaptive management, which is familiar to scientists, but obviously it's generally relevant to traditional owners as well in terms of management of country and cultural management of country. I'll throw to Andy in a minute, who's probably managing the chat online in terms of questions, and then I might open it up to the room here at Heidelberg. But maybe just first of all, before we go there, guys, what key learnings have you had out of this project? You've touched on some of them, but in terms of advice to others who might be starting on this journey of two ways of knowing and collaboration between science and traditional owner knowledge, any key thoughts around that?
Yeah, so lots of key learnings for us. For myself personally, monitoring, I did not know much about the monitoring. I said about the plants, so there's lots of little things that I've learned over time to actually get my knowledge up to date. Working together, that's a big thing. It's I encourage people to get up and actually see what we do and see how we can all work together. And there might be some knowledge that we don't know that we can table and actually look after the country together.
Yeah, if I had to reflect on that, I suppose I've learned a lot, obviously, and some of that has been around like you just knowing how to operate in a partnership, and while I like to think I'm a respectful person, like really understanding how to listen, like that was a key learning for me. Like this idea of active listening, I think a lot of us find that, if there's silence and that's a problem, and that we need to fill it with some sort of noise or anecdote or thought. Sometimes having, just time and space to think, it can be a really useful thing. And there was one other really key learning for me in this one, in particular, and Blair kind of touched on it, but this idea about comparing a cultural burn or Wiyn Murrup burn with an ecological burn or a planned burn. And I think that was one of the ideas that we kind of had floating around initially in the project. And to me, it seemed like a logical idea, it seemed interesting and those kinds of things. But the more that we thought about it and the more that we talked about it, it seemed a bit like maybe we don't need to validate Wiyn Murrup with some sort of comparison with the way that we do things at the moment. Like maybe that's maybe not the right question to be asking. And so that was a really interesting one about like asking the right question. Sometimes an interesting question isn't always the right one. So that was an interesting one.
And I think in that, people kind of like just assume like what's the outcome, but we're not looking at just the fire. That's just a little part. We're also looking at what's happening before and after, and what animal's going to come back there. Like how can we look after that in a different way? Fire is part of our tool, definitely, but yeah, it's all them other little steps that are in between that.
Great, thanks guys. So we've got about 15 minutes left for some Q&A. So Andy, I'm hoping you've been able to distill some of the questions online and might have a couple of questions you can fire at Blair and Brad, and then we'll open it up to people in the room.
Yeah, no worries. Thanks, James. Heaps of questions from the chat ranging from lots of different things, whether it's the specifics of the burning and specifics about the project, how it's set up. I've got one that sort of talks to what Brad was saying, how this was a Wadawurrung-led project, and it was specifically around eucalypt grassy woodlands. Are there any plans from Wadawurrung to look into other vegetation types in terms of monitoring and this type of burning?
Yeah, there's actually a whole bunch. So our country is pretty vast. It's goes from the rocky country to the sea country, and I know I'm talking pretty broadly, but we've got coastal country, which is heathland. So we've got guys that we're looking at burning down there in different types, looking at bushland burns, grassland, all different kinds, and sometimes they can be really complex. But yes, that is something that we are looking into, and we do. There is like these. We're just talking about 3 burns that we've got here. We also do multiple other. I think we're up to 16 burns ourselves this year. So that's right over country, all the way up to like coastal
Mute there, Andy.
Sorry, I was trying to make sure I wasn't going to make any other noise over Blair. Thank you, Blair. That was a really good answer. This next question is around the opportunities to learn from this process. We've got one question that relates to this cultural firework linking into the rest of the department's cultural burning firework across DECA. Is that a linkage that already exists, or is it something that's going to be connected up later on?
Sorry, Andy, I was just shuffling myself. I wasn't paying attention properly there, mate.
That was my fault, sorry.
It's all good.
So this question, I didn't want to guess.
It's all good. So we've got lots of questions about learning opportunities from this. One is about whether this project specifically was linked to other DECA cultural firework that's going on.
I suppose well, do you?
So one of the burns definitely had a DECA influence as well. One of them was complete private property, and then the other was still classed as private but the council region. So it was kind of broad in that sense, how we worked through 3 different agencies. And yeah, the DECA process was definitely put on the JFMP, and it was a joint management plan, and like we still went through their processes, but in our cultural sense, most mobs in Victoria do burn their JFMP as well, and their own private burns. And the learnings between that, yeah, we got a really good understanding of how DECA like to do their burns and want to kind of conduct it, and how we can have influence on that. Some of the DECA regions have changed their kind of burning styles up to a bit more of a cool burning as such.
Yeah, and look, I don't have heaps to influence that question, Andy, but yeah, like you'd hope that the connections, that even if they're not directly connected, they're indirectly connected, and by us kind of producing reports that are publicly accessible and things like that, that these things can help inform the broader conversation around burning.
Great.
Put on there that there is also lots of mob knowledge that doesn't get shared out as well. That's stuff that's kept for the mob. We give that to the elders, and they can pick whether that kind of goes out. Same if some of the knowledge in these reports, that's run past the elders. They got a good understanding of what's going out. So we can still have that identity of our knowledge as well.
I think you guys have answered 5 other questions in the chat as well on that one. So well done. I'll let some people from the room also ask you some questions. If we have time, we can come back to the online chat as well. Thank you.
Thanks, Andy. So to the room here at Heidelberg, anyone want to ask a question? Hey, please speak up.
Yes, David Cameron at ARI. I just wanted to touch on the issue of site selection, particularly because I'm thinking back to when Ian Lunt at La Trobe did a PhD on similar country to Wadawurrung Country on the Sale Plains. And it was grassy woodland which had had a good 100 years or more of management impacts, which from the results of his PhD, he showed that the resulting complement of species available depended entirely on what the management driver was. So when you had land that had been cleared largely, just scattered Gippsland red gums in the paddocks, and you'd had heavy stocking and all that for all those years, compared to, say, rail reserves, cemeteries, that sort of land, you had very different suites of species that had resulted because of different fire and grazing and natural browsing pressures. So the issue about site selection that I want to ask is, with a similar situation in Wadawurrung Country, can you look specifically at site selection that looks at very different long-term histories, like whether it's Inverleigh Common or whether it's some of the little Truganina cemetery-like sites, or whether you're looking at sites that have had very low levels of browsing or grazing pressure from farmers, which varies a lot across the landscape, and try to select sites for which you might have a very different species complement available to start this issue of monitoring what the impact of these different fire management practices is when maybe more native species are still there or different ones are still there.
That's, yeah, 100%. I agree with you on that. We do look at different kinds of sites. So some might be really depleted, like the grasslands going out to Werribee. But then some of the inland, that's a bit more different. We've seen grasslands where they're just all native and burning that is a different, and you can definitely see that. Was there cattle on that? Was there what kind of management techniques? Roadsides are another big one where I've seen lots of nice plants pop up. So yeah, that definitely does impact how choices as well. Sometimes it might be too big for us to handle. Sometimes there might be just enough and we can easily do that ourselves. So yeah, definitely do resemble that.
Maybe follow up, do you get much access to private land?
No, we don't. There is numbers and stats about how much land Wadawurrung has access to, like the country, but it's very low. I think it's over 80% of our country is with private. We do struggle to get on some private land. Most of the like friends groups and like the CMA regions, they've got really good contacts and people are quite welcoming to have us on there. And Murrup was a prime example. We could go out there. That site had a bit more minimal impact of like cattle and stuff. There was a sheep station there, but they weren't really roaming in that spot. And then there's places where we've seen where there's been no cattle, no nothing. Haven't had the chance to even put anything on that, and they've just left it. So what's kind of like the grasses from that is a bit different. So yeah, we've managed to deal with that.
Any other questions from inside, Di?
Thanks so much to both of you. That's fascinating. Blair, it's probably a question to you, but it's an emotional, cultural question about how you feel when you're out on country with elders out there with you and the stories that emanate from those elders and what that gives you and those younger mob on country as well.
So for anyone that couldn't hear, that was like what's the feeling on site and the stories and all that. It's beautiful. It's amazing being on site, doing our cultural burn, and we can walk through that fire. We can tell our young ones, like, look, you can go touch that bit of fire now. They touch it and they're amazed. We tell them that, oh look, that fire's going to finish and stop over there, and it does. And the joy in their eyes to see that, like we're reading what that country is doing. It's amazing. It's a magical feeling being out on site and being with the mob and with the elders and burning. And everyone is, as Brad said, it's so calm and relaxing. It's the best thing in my job. I love it. We get to go out and look after that. And then the elders, they subconsciously start talking about burns and like, oh, well, we used to go and do this with our grandma. And then that kind of starts that kind of like, I heard someone call it like cultural mapping, where we're mapping like families and like, oh, my grandma did this and my grandma did that. So then they all start talking in themselves, and it's a really magical thing to see that they get to look after that, they get to do that again. Yeah, the stories, I can't really share some of them because they don't really want them out, but yeah, like stories do come from it, and it means that we also get to kind of continue our storylines and our song lines as well. Like that's another deeper part of our law that we can do with being on country burning.
To the question, great question, and thanks for the answer. I might go back online and then we'll come back. So Andy, is there anything else online in terms of questions that have popped up?
There's plenty. So I'm going to bunch a couple of the questions together, and there's a lot of interest, I guess, in the processes that you guys have used in terms of the fires, how fire's been delivered to the country, but also how it's been monitored and reseeding, or sort of how you help the country recover after the fire. Is there a way people, whether they're on private land or public land, able to get involved in this project going on in future?
So we do a thing with Cranmite CMA and Council Region, and it's called Burning in Your Backyard. And we literally get out there. We have a whole bunch of private properties in this one area, and we teach them like safer techniques to burn. They have similar techniques to what we do, but it's also just teaching them that fire is actually a good thing. It's not a scary thing. And they've been quite successful. After that, you kind of a year later and talk to the same people and say, oh, we burned this, and now we're noticing all this kangaroo grass popping up. And they love it. So them little things that we are teaching just on the side, just making sure people are kind of happy with fire and they're safe with fire, has an ongoing effect as well. In regarding to getting on board this project? Or
Awesome.
Yeah, I think the monitoring is probably not as sexy, but it's kind of like there would be ways to find a way into that. So the monitoring that's being done as part of this project is being led by Wadawurrung and the CMA and DECA, but there's also other agencies or other groups contributing to that. So I know that the Geelong Field Naturalist Club come out and spare some of their time. So while it might not be that there's open invitation to all volunteers, there's probably are mechanisms for people to find a way to contribute to the project and the monitoring if they were interested. But certainly, yeah, get in contact with myself or the CMA if you're interested in that for sure.
Perfect. And a follow up to that, I guess, if people wanted to observe or participate or contribute in some way to a project like this, is that a possibility, or how would they go about that?
the burn sense, because this is kind of a question that pops up internal as well. So we're starting to set up burns that can actually have people being there present to observe. Get people on a burn ground is really like, people don't like the insurance companies go crazy over, so we try and keep them out. But we have kind of safe designated areas where there's information tents. You can come and learn, you can come and look, and be someone there to talk about like what's going on, why is this happening, that kind of stuff.
Yeah. So how would people connect with those opportunities? Do you think they may not be able to do it right now, but it
can be on our social medias as well. This is kind of a newer space, so we're still kind of trialing and erroring. There's one burning Ballarat that we're looking to do where, we're going out burning and we're going to have an info tent sit there. There might be some media that pop up, we're not sure, but they're kind of things that we can put on our social media to say, hey, we're doing a cultural burn. This one's open to the public to come and observe and come and learn. So, yeah, stuff like that.
Thank you so much. I think we all learned a lot in all this, so thank you.
Thanks, Andy. I might come back to the room. We had a question here.
Blair, I was involved in a burning in your backyard project in Meredith some time ago. There's two things there that sort of come off that. One, I suppose, is the window for a safe burn is sort of decreasing now with climate change. As a result, there's probably, I feel, more pressure for it to be done more intensively by a larger number of people within that window. There do seem to be little opportunities for private land custodians to actually do that in a way that's safe. And you alluded to insurance companies, and you want to burn a pile of sticks now, you need to obviously put in a request to get a permit for that.
Yeah, a couple of things in that. The climate change, I'm no scientist. I don't know much about it. One big thing I've always got told was like that climate's changing, but the people also have to change with it. So that's kind of been evident in burning, how the people have changed their techniques in burning over time. So we've had to change our techniques, some of our techniques in burning, say, phalaris than kangaroo grass. So how can we do that? Definitely understand.
You mentioned in your presentation that you've got a cultural burn coming up at one site, which doesn't involve DECA and the CFA. How have you kind of got through the kind of permit kind of process?
Yeah, so that's kind of picked on the region. So the region, the council region, they don't require any kind of permit. We still notify the burn hotlines and stuff to say, if people see smoke, yes, there's a burn. Wadawurrung also have the insurances, same as the government. So we're covered under our insurances. All the people are all covered. So there's that kind of like red tape stuff that we have to do. We're now at the point where we can find. I understand there's some mobs that can't get to that point at the moment. One thing I like to say to them is like, let us know, we'll come and help. We're very open to supporting other mobs, and we'll come up to you guys and help us.
Right. Might have time for one more. Maybe one more from online. Andy, is there
Yep, I got one more ready. We've got one asking about fire intensity. Is there any monitoring done on fire intensity to gauge how different weed responses to heat might change in a burning like this one?
So we had some chick come out from one of the universities in Melbourne. She was expecting a really hot, intense fire. She had all these like heat sensor things and the fire never made it to her. Like we started in the middle to help her out, and then, like we knew it was going to go out. And I said maybe put some of the heat things over here where it might record it. It was so low that like when the fire got to it, it kind of went out. So, like that's how kind of low intensity it is, and her results, she couldn't really get results because like the fire just wouldn't be hot enough for her. So in kind of that with like seeds, some seeds do need that hotter fire, and you can see that. Some seeds need that smoke. So it's also like how we're looking at.
Look, yeah, I suppose in terms of the question in regards to this program, like, yeah, I didn't have any way of kind of capturing, intensity, but we were sort of mapping the extent of the burns and things like that to make sure we knew which parts of our monitoring were being affected by fire, because it's patchy in nature. We couldn't expect that every quadrat would get impacted by fire, so we need to know that. I do know that there is a bit of research around like different types of plants and fire severity or fire intensity. And in particular, I can think of one local one from the volcanic plains, which compared phalaris versus kangaroo grass, and phalaris just had so much higher intensity of fire. There was, magnitudes greater than Thermida, which kind of was important because, like this phalaris is a really strong competitor. It's a bad thing to have in grassy systems, but it's, in terms of outcompeting natives, but it's also a bad thing to have in the landscape because it can potentially carry fire a lot better and things like that. So another reason to help trying to control it, I suppose. But yeah.
And like, unfortunately, some of these fires might not outcompete the like phalaris as such. Like that's such a hard weed to get rid of. And some of our sites we've had to burn it and then we come back and spray it when we can see the shoots starting to pop up. So it's how we can kind of look after the country in that way. We're not a fan of putting chemical on the country, but that's a kind of plant that need to use chemical because our fires aren't going to work with that.
All right. Well, thank you again, Blair and Brad. Thanks to everyone for attending, both here at ARI, but also online. I'm hoping the tech worked for people. The team's putting up some links there where you can join the ARI updates and seminars. And in relation to this particular project, Blair, you mentioned a number of videos that have been made. I think they're in the chat as well. So thanks everyone for attending. Have a great day and hope to see you in a couple of weeks at the next seminar. Thank you.